Welcome back to Plague Scythe Studios, everyone. Ryan here, and today I'm once again nerding out to an instant classic stomp box design, the Marshall Bluesbreaker circuit. This will be the second month in a row that I've put off the OCD video. Sorry about that. I plan to make it next month. The release of the Horsebreaker kind of threw everything off on my schedule, but it works out because the foundation that the Bluesbreaker circuit laid is a very important one for pedals, and the OCD kind of took that and ran with it. And so having an understanding of this circuit, I think, is going to help in the long run for that video. Now, like a lot of the videos in this playlist, I don't own the original. The Marshall Bluesbreaker Mark I pedals are going for $300+ even for ones that are rusty and in not great condition. So I'm not really going to shell out that much for it when you can get one of these for $250, and it has a Klon circuit in it as well. So yeah, we're going to use the Horsebreaker. Now, I have seen a couple users report that their Horsebreakers sound darker on the same settings compared to an original Marshall Bluesbreaker pedal. Doesn't really mean anything to me though, because if you compare to the same pedals, they can sound different on the same settings. Pot tolerances are a bitch, not to mention that these older pedals could have used different, styles of components, or maybe the wrong one depending on what was in the factory that day. You never really know. Regardless, I would expect Cherrytone and Nick and his team to be, well, they scrutinize all these circuits to death. They're not going to miss, one or two of the 20 resistors that are in this thing. It's something like 15, maybe 30 parts in total. This is a very simple circuit compared to most of the stuff they build. So especially given some of the comparisons I've heard, I would say this is a very faithful copy and will do wonders for this video. For those of you that are already familiar with the Bluesbreaker story will know it's a bit of a ridiculous, convoluted mess, because before Bluesbreaker was the name of a pedal, it was the name of an amplifier. And before that even, it was the name of a recording group. So things get fuzzy, to say the least. This is a story that Josh from JHS Pedals tells really well. He's got a full video on Bluesbreaker inspired pedals. It kind of goes over some of the history. So if you want a deeper dive into that side of things, go check out his channel in general. It's brilliant. The high-level history goes something like this. So back in 1966, Eric Clapton recorded on an album with John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, something like Bluesbreakers featuring Eric Clapton, something super generic. But the main takeaway for us guitarists is he was using an early 60s model's Marshall JTM 45 combo amp. Semi-open back, 2x12, all tube, even tube rectified, 30 watts, little box of British magic. And, well, you want to be honest about the situation, basically a Fender Bassman clone with the old 34s and some tweaks here and there to the tone stack and whatnot. But all the better for it, because it just sounded amazing. And it was that guitar production, and especially playing style, that influenced so many for years to come. And eventually people started calling the JTM 45 combos Bluesbreakers because of that. Now, there's nothing inherently special about the Bluesbreaker circuit compared to a JTM 45 head. In fact, they're identical. It's the 2x12 open back cabinet design that really creates the Bluesbreaker tones, the marriage between the two. And, likewise, you could take a JTM 45 30-watt amplifier head, stick it on an open back 2x12 load of the greenbacks, and it's going to sound basically identical. So keep that in mind as we go forward, that the Bluesbreaker sound as we know it has more to do, or at least equally to do, with the speaker choice and cabinet design as it does with the amplifier. Now, this has been reissued time and time again. They still call these JTM combo amps blues breakers officially, but back in 1988, 89 time range, Marshall started getting into pedals, at least trying them out on the market, first by releasing the Governor, which is kind of a cool, like, crank JCM 800 sound, and it did some interesting things, both in terms of its circuit design and quality of life features. For instance, it has, like, full EQ controls, which you didn't see hardly at all, especially at that point on pedals. And so it gives it kind of this amp or even preamp in a box kind of quality that, is popularly emulated today. So they liked where that was going and decided to expand the range and kind of relaunch it in a sense, which eventually brought about the Drive Master, which was basically just a re-release of the Governor, the Shred Master, which is, I think, criminally underrated. I really, really like the model in the AXFX and AX8. And then, of course, the Blues Breaker. Compared to its already understated brethren, the Marshall Blues Breaker, donned in its simple blue lettering, is a rather simple pedal. 3 controls, really simple circuit. We're talking something like 30, 35 components in total. Not a lot going on. And it's one of the drawbacks that I really like how other pedal manufacturers have expanded upon the Blues Breaker platform by adding full tone controls. I really wish Marshall would have put a bass, middle, treble on here for reasons we'll get into in the analysis. I feel like it holds it back, but also in a way it gives it a distinct sound. Now you might look at those controls and think, oh, it's a tube screamer, and it has some similarities, but not exactly. The weird thing with this pedal launch and the series in general is they were rather well reviewed, but they didn't sell all that great. So they were discontinued rather quickly. And, the few that were out there, people were just kind of giving them away, which is kind of funny considering what they're going for now. They did eventually kind of relaunch some of these things. There was the Jackhammer and the Blues Breaker Mark II and a new 4 knobs configuration and a more compact pedal series, but by all accounts, the Mark II of the Blues Breaker is inferior in about every measurable way compared to its predecessor. Not sure exactly what they screwed up by adding a boost section, but there you go. And because of that, you can still find them for a pretty affordable price compared to the original early 90s release. Now, neither of these pedal lines did, excellently compared to, I'm sure, what Marshall wanted them to do, but a couple different things happened that eventually put these in the spotlight. So John Mayer actually started to use a Blues Breaker in the early 2000s, and once that was spotted on his pedal board, then, that started to pick up some steam. Then you had boutique pedal builders like Analog Man that grabbed some of these circuits and made some small tweaks or even stacked a couple of them in their own pedals. And now we have countless Blues Breaker derivatives or inspired by pedals to completely saturate the market to the point that it kind of makes the original Blues Breaker pedals redundant. And I would say that this is one such case. And for me, it makes 2 pedals redundant. Speaking of this pedal specifically, the Centura circuit makes a really nice pairing with the Blues Breaker because, for one, they complement each other, but for 2, they're kind of polar opposites. Volume gain and tone behaves so differently between the two, but you can still see how pedals like the Klon or the OCD took this transparent overdrive idea and ran with it, turned it up to 11 in some ways with more output volume, different gain structure, more powerful tone controls. But at the end of the day, it all sort of still comes back to the Blues Breaker. Aside from a couple other, minor additions here and there, I would consider the Blues Breaker one of the first transparent overdrive pedals. And I use that in a specific way because I wouldn't say the Tube Screamer is transparent. You got a big mid hump. The gain structure in the stock formats is actually kind of always there without modification. And, asymmetrical clipping pedals like the Super Overdrive are still kind of in the same vein, especially hard clipping pedals don't even count. Rather, the Blues Breaker circuit aims to give you a new texture to play with, allows you to add another layer of harmonics if you so choose, without necessarily corrupting your core guitar tone or even your amp sound. But when you get into some of those more aggressive settings, then yes, it resembles those cranked JTM combo tones. But that's kind of your extremes. You're not getting metal distortion out of this thing unless you put it through an already high gain amp. And I don't think it works that well with, you know, your rectifier or diesel or what have you kind of amps. This is very much a good British on British kind of thing. So with that, let's talk about frequency response, level, all that good stuff. And we will start with the level analysis. And this is a bit of a congested chart, but the main thing I want you to take away here is that there's only a little bitty range of settings where you get an overall level boost. As you'll see, the white line, both gain and level maxed out, tone at noon. That's basically the only setting that you get a significant level boost, with most of your frequency content resulting in, you know, well over 0 decibels. But compared to unity gain, everything else is rather quiet. In fact, if you put these controls at noon, you're looking at well under unity gain. So yes, you could use this as kind of a step back if you so choose, in kind of the same way that rolling off your volume on a semi-crunchy amp can get you into clean territory. It's a good way to do that. And so you'll notice for basically all the settings in this video, if I want a boost effect, volume is probably around here somewhere. And even gain, because with volume maxed out and gain minimized, you're looking at still significantly quieter than your run-of-the-mill tube screamer or especially clean boost. So you're not getting 20 dB here. Simply not going to happen. The last figure touched on an interesting phenomenon there. And as you'll see here, when you turn the gain control from 0 to noon, it actually doesn't get much louder. It just shifts the frequency response from the lower end to more mid-focused. This is certainly not a tube screamer mid-hump of any kind. This is a gentle roll-off on the high and low end, and it's kind of, in my opinion, the bare minimum of what you would want to do when you add dirt in front of an amplifier. But overall, it just kind of sounds flatter on the lower settings and then starts to come to life around noon. And yes, you are starting to get into some granular, very textured gain response there, but it's not something that I would call, you know, high gain distortion at that point. Now, when you turn it up past there, only then will you start to see a significant level boost and starts to become more mid-focused in that, you know, 1000, 1200 hertz range, which is kind of perfect. That's right around Marshall territory. When you combine this peculiar frequency response and the gain control with another tone control, things can become a little hard to follow. But the main thing to take away here is with both minimized, you're shifting that peak frequency response way over. And in fact, it becomes a lot more aggressive to the point that you get a significant roll off after 200 hertz. Doesn't sound good in that position. You're not going to see me use it that way. On the polar opposite side, increasing both to their maximum position shifts it over to about 2K hertz, and it becomes rather aggressive and scratchy at that point. Could be useful. I tend to keep tone there or under for my amplifiers. The tone minimum and max gain positions and the opposite are neutral by comparison, though in the latter position you get possibly the most flat frequency response that you can get out of this pedal, albeit at a very low level compared to Unity. Here's another look at those frequency response plots, but isolated based on minimum and maximum tone positions, just to give you some more context. So the main takeaway from these is there's not much of a use for tone under noon, I find, unless you're specifically boosting this pedal. Even then, unless you're going for like a super honky tube screamer sound, this is even aggressive enough to do that. I just don't find it useful. You're not going to see me cut this much. It'll depend on your amp at the end of the day, but that's my 2 cents really. Things just get a little complicated with the gain control where the frequency response isn't flat across its range, and so you really have to dial these in dependently. You can't just leave one and not touch the other, which is where those dedicated bass middle treble controls, I think, would have been really useful. So to understand why that happens, let's take a quick look at the circuit, and here it is. Pretty easy, huh? By comparison to the other pedals we've looked at in this series, excluding the treble booster because that one's super simple. This one is rather straightforward. In fact, it only uses a single dual op-amp integrated circuit. That's why you'll only see one black chip on this PCB. And the overall clipping setup, the way they're getting the distortion, isn't that different from the Tube Screamer setup. This is a non-inverting section here, so it should be more aggressive than, say, your run-of-the-mill Tube Screamer or even some hard clipping pedals, but the choice of diodes and actually running two of them in series creates an effect that sounds less harsh, and it has a higher headroom for clipping, though the overall sound signature is very different from something like a Tube Screamer. And people have thrown out that grainy, granular word before. I completely agree. That's exactly what it sounds like. To use some of the ridiculous fluff terms that some of us guitar players enjoy so much, you know, a Tube Screamer is like spreading icing on top of a cake. It's smooth and can be really thick, but not too obtrusive depending on how you dial it in. The Blues Breaker is kind of like stirring cornmeal. It's not like overly abrasive. It can be on the top end. There's a grit to it, but it's still, you know, thick in a way and kind of preserves whatever else is going on in your mix. And then something like a Proco Rat is a serial killer stabbing you with 10 chainsaws at the same time. So, you know, that's kind of where the Blues Breaker circuit falls in terms of tone. And that tone control looks like it's just a simple low-pass filter that you determine with one resistor being replaced by a pot and another serial resistor. So again, this is actually not that complicated of a circuit overall, which I have a feeling played into it being cloned, copied, made into, inspired by pedals quite a bit. So there's a lot of PCBs and stuff out there that you can buy. If you find that, you know, a product like this isn't for you, or you don't want to pay the Analog Man price or even the JHS price. So, you know, if you're interested in the tones and findings of this video, keep that in mind as we go forward. Or if you use Fractal, there's a Blues Breaker model there and you're done. So this is, I guess, a redundant video for you then. With that, let's talk about some of the ways that I would actually go about using this pedal, and none of them are particularly, you know, chug metal kind of stuff. There's one that I do like for high gain, but other than that, this is another instance that kind of like the Klon Centura circuit ranges from adding just a touch of dirt to kind of just being an always on thing. And that's what I find the Blues Breaker does really well, is just being that always on magic touch. And that's the first thing that we're going to explore here, which I'll call always on harmonics going through an American Fender style clean channel. let's say you're playing through a similar single channel clean platform amp, but you need a channel 2 of sorts, preferably a British flavored, mildly overdriven channel 2. Enter the Blues Breaker. This is where I start to turn up gain quite a bit more, tone just to taste depending on your amplifier. Volume, I follow my same Klon philosophy where I want it to kind of tickle the red. You know, I want it to push those tubes just a little bit to get some natural dirt in that sense, but not too much where it's, you know, way louder than your clean channel. So that's kind of my philosophy there. And you got quite a bit of range on here. And it's ultimately going to come down to how you play your guitar. If you don't want to roll off volume all the time, like I don't, then you're going to be a little more constrained. But if you want to give your amplifier a little more juice, roll off volume, turn this on, then roll it back up, then you have that much more range to play with. The next two configurations very much fall into that transparent category in the sense that our amplifier tone doesn't change that dramatically. It does sound boosted in a sense, but you know, if you hear it on record, I don't think you're going to immediately think that's a Blues Breaker pedal. You just might think, okay, level boost, crank the gain a little more, if that. So this is the crunch through crunch setup, where it's a cascading gain stage thing of sorts. So I'll still be putting it through that American style Mesa Mark Series amp. This could work for damn near everything. I don't like it on really, really thick amps, you know, those aforementioned Mesa 5150 kind of sounds. This pedal's not for them, but mid gain to British high gain stuff, this really works to act as, I guess, channel 3. If you're going from channel 2 to channel 3, you still get plenty of dynamics, and I like it in a sort of Klon OCD style thing. Lastly, the high gain British boost, and this works the best in my opinion with amps that sound like themselves basically no matter what you do to them, and amplifiers like this fall in that category. Vox AC amps fall in that category. So if you have something that already sits in the mix sort of similarly to a pedal like this, or a pedal going through a clean amp would, then this is where this could become particularly useful. This is kind of into, you know, mid gain, almost high gain, but, you know, it's right on the edge for me. But I want it to be tighter, add the sound of, you know, like we're throwing another preamp tube in front of it, and turn up the level. And that's basically what I'm doing here. So, final thoughts on the Bluesbreaker circuit. I like it a lot. I was really looking forward to getting my hands on this pedal for the Centura side more than anything, but I gotta say, I think the Breaker really deserves as much credit, if not more, in a lot of ways. With that said, there is absolutely no reason, in my opinion, to own all three of these. You know, if you were to split this down the middle, pick your poison and stick with it depending on what you play, because I find that they do very similar jobs. Unless you're wanting like a JTM 45 channel on your pedal board, you know, having a Klon or an OCD or these other transparent overdrives from Exotic, or you name it, kind of redundant in my opinion. They do very similar things, and you know, you can stack them all and get some cool sounds, I'm sure, like you can with this. But I think this is a circuit that, though it's, you know, quite a bit newer than, say, the Tube Screamer or, you know, your MXR Distortion, it's showing its age in the same way, because there's been so many improvements in terms of output level and, you know, switching and tone controls and quality of life features that if I was going to be serious, I'm going to look at, you know, Analog Man, King of Tone, or JHS Morning Glory, or Wampler, is that Pantheon? Is that the one they make? Something like that, you know. This is a really cool project in the sense that this is like super authentic, and I'm really happy to have it. But viewing this through the lens of a working musician's pedal, there's definitely opportunity for improvement. So if you like that sound, I would very much recommend that you look into, you know, some of those options I listed there on the market. Really great stuff. And if you're still not sure, then stay tuned for the OCD episode, and probably a shootout at the end of all of this where we take a look at a lot of these drive pedals that I've showcased throughout the past few months or so. Any other questions, comments, please leave them down below. As always, tell me what you think. Tell me your favorite Bluesbreaker setups, and we will see you next time. Bye.